Hey guys, Scott Fishman here. Today we have a great guest, someone who I just finished his book, Follow the Buzzards, Pro Wrestling in the Age of COVID-19, while I was on a cruise, finished it in a couple days. So who better to bring on than to talk about this than the author himself, the best-selling author, Keith Elliot Greenberg. How are you today?
Hey, great, Scott. I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, so this was a time like, and you mentioned in the book, this was a time like no other. And I think this is going to be a really impactful book, not only right now, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when it starts to escape a lot of people's memories and we go on with our lives, and then this will be something that will trigger that. So talk about just how this book compares to the other ones that you've written over the years.
It's funny you say that. This is a thought that came to me about a day ago, that this is more of a legacy book than a book in the moment. And I understand how people now might not want to necessarily relive the COVID age, even though we're still in the COVID age. We're not in the age of the lockdowns. But I do think it's like, you read these books about the death of WCW, and it's like, oh, yeah, well, it almost has more resonance now than it did at the time. But what happened was I had done a book called Too Sweet Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution. And when that book was completed, I thought it called for a sequel because it ended with the first broadcast of AEW Dynamite. And there were a lot of loose ends, like, well, what happens to indie wrestling now that there's this promotion that's acquired a lot of the indie wrestlers? And then COVID hit. And so I said, I think this has to be a COVID book. And fortunately, my executive editor at ECW Press, Michael Holmes, is a wrestling fan. And he said, yeah, I agree with you. So that's how the book came about.
And what's great about this is not
Did we
only
get locked again? I
um
might sit here and wait for you to unlock it.
um what's great about the book also is that it kind of ties with the political scene at the time. It kind of sets the
Okay, so
stage.
you were locked for a few minutes, so I don't know where we ended.
We're talking about the locks. All right.
I did my spiel about how the book came about,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you were locked. Okay.
Then you talk about the political scene at the time that's interwoven throughout. So clearly you did a lot of research for that because obviously wrestling like the back of your hand and you do research for that, but following politics in real time as well, and seeing how that's tied together, I think is really interesting. And you see a lot of the correlation and a lot of things that are impacting one and the other, and they're very symbiotic throughout the book. So talk about that and how that kind of came out organically and your decision to kind of use that to tell the story as well.
Well, you are somebody who's well read, so you may be familiar with the book, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Bronx is Burning. And that's a book about, well, you could say it's about the 1977 New York Yankees, but it goes back and forth between the New York Yankees in 1977, which was a very, it was a very tempestuous team. And then you also have it's New York City in 1977, which I was around for. You also have the Son of Sam killings, and you have the blackout of 1977, and you have the looting and the riots that followed. And so you were very much taken to the times. And I think in the time of COVID, you couldn't really distinguish what was going on in professional wrestling from what was going on in the real world, because here you couldn't, look, you have matches in an empty arena, so you can't pretend COVID isn't there. You have the George Floyd case, and you have certain wrestlers coming to the ring in Black Lives Matter singlets or armbands. So you have to acknowledge how the outside world is affecting professional wrestling. You could even say politically, the whole reason why WWE and to a lesser extent AEW were allowed to record their matches was because you had Ron DeSantis, who was a high-ranking Republican, designating pro wrestling an essential business in Florida. And here you have Donald Trump, who's the president, and his wife has and you have Linda McMahon is running a super PAC, a Republican super PAC. And you also have Nick Khan's father, Shad Khan, going on, because had they chosen to record in, say, Connecticut or Massachusetts, you might not have had week-to-week professional wrestling.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible that the show did really go on, and the saying, the show must go on, and it actually did unwavering, no stoppage in that sense for WWE and AEW. So I think another really cool thing about this book is it really shows how the ingenuity of a promoter and a wrestling promoter and its wrestlers and everyone on staff to kind of have the show go on, this unwavering passion, not only, for financial reasons as well, but also just for the passion, the love that they have, and the importance they felt for the show to go on and provide an escape for people. You had people doing shows, in parking lots and empty arenas.
But these are indie wrestlers.
Yeah.
And that's what I want. That's what I'd like people to know. This is not only, again, it's a sequel to my book on indie wrestling. And so, yes, WWE was extremely innovative. The cinematic match existed before, but they took the cinematic match to levels we'd never seen. And, an AEW did Stadium Stampede. And Stadium Stampede is one of those matches I could watch again and again. But we also had indie wrestlers with limited budgets, and they were improvising as well. And, like I remember being in Indiana at an afternoon show in a park, and everybody was spread out, it's social distanced. And I said to Brett Lauderdale, the promoter of GCW, Game Changer Wrestling, why are we doing this in the middle of the afternoon? And he said, so I can save money on lighting. And honestly, that's, it's like there were wrestlers who needed to wrestle. Their constitution called for it. There were fans who needed to watch wrestling, to see wrestling live. And how do you do it in what, at the time, with very limited information, you consider a safe environment? And these guys managed to do it.
Yeah, not only on the national level, but internationally, there's a lot of things that went on that we didn't even realize
I
all
didn't
across the
realize
world.
it either.
So shining a light on that, I think, is really great, and that's really makes this such a well-rounded book.
And that's why I thank you. I greatly appreciate that, Scott. And you're quoted in the book. I've always been an admirer of your work, but that's why I feel this is a book people will look back on when you see this Finnish promotion used COVID as an opportunity to expand into Estonia. That's something none of us in the US, or very few of us, would have known. And, I wanted to have that all in there because, again, when I'm long gone, I want people to walk into a library and open this book and say, this is a snapshot of history.
Mm-hmm. And, before, you early in the book, as you're writing it, you're like, this book was this was going to be the best year ever for professional wrestling and everything that's been going on. The stage was set and this happened. And now we're going to, a lot of that stuff was formulated. I think a lot of the ideas from that era now, maybe planning, I hate to say, things happen for a reason, but it seems like we're seeing that delay. But now 2022, we're building up. And what do you see now for maybe even next year? Do you see kind of like what was 2020 was now happening in 2022 or next year? Or talk a little bit about
I agree with you.
What's your forecast?
I think about this all the time. Um, you know, look, Tony Khan was planning to do his Northeastern tours in 2020. And that was going to be, him making his big statement. Hey, I'm here. I'm in the New York area. What are you going to do, Vince McMahon? And he did in 2021 when he did Grand Slam. And he did Newark before that. So I see everybody picking up where they left. The big difference is you now have Triple H running WWE. And, I don't I don't skimp on my praise of Triple H. For the 22 years I wrote for the WWE's magazines, I got to know Triple H and was very impressed with primarily his wrestling knowledge, but also his outside knowledge. And I thought, like, this is a guy with foresight. This is a guy with vision. And I knew Vince McMahon around the time of the first WrestleMania and a little bit beforehand. That was a young man with vision. And now you have Triple H in charge. And this is a guy who has a great wrestling mind and also, knows about things outside the business. And to see him and Tony Khan doing battle, it's a very exciting time. And I'm, grateful to still have my faculties during this era.
Another topic that you do touch on is very difficult, and you tackle really well, and you kind of preface just how much
Please,
care
we
and
just
time
lost our connection.
is the Me Too movement. You talk to a lot of people and you don't mention them by name. Take a lot of time and care to discuss the Me Too movement, how in the world of professional wrestling. Talk about that and your approach to it and the challenges and just making sure that you do it right.
Well, when I did Too Sweet Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution, I mentioned this in the book, and it's funny, I'm doing the audiobook now. So I read through this. I was reading this chapter last night when I was recording it. There was one woman who contacted me, and she said, "I liked your book, but I don't think you gave enough. You gave enough attention to women's wrestling." And yeah, I don't mind messages from fans or readers because that makes me a better writer. If it's if somebody's just saying Keith Greenberg is a shitty writer and I hated his stuff when he was writing for the WWE magazine, and his new stuff for Inside the Ropes magazine, the UK sucks, I don't pay much attention to it. But if they're saying I would have enjoyed this, then I take it seriously. And so I decided that women's wrestling needed to have attention paid to it. And as fate would have it, the speaking out movement occurred during this COVID era. So you had wrestlers being called out for sexual improprieties. And I said, okay, well, how would I full time? I work as a TV producer and I cover mainly true crime. And I go, how would I handle this if I were covering it and it was not a wrestling story? Because this is bigger than wrestling. And when I've done stories about sexual abuse, you don't name the accuser, because you don't want people tracking down that accuser and calling her a liar and terrorizing her. And that was how I treated the speaking out accusers. If I wasn't going to put their names in the book. At the same time, I had to be discreet about which males are mentioned in the book because, some of the accusations were spurious. So, and I don't want to dismiss, sexual abuse in wrestling. I've witnessed some of it. And some of the men have resumed their careers. And I didn't want to put someone's name in a book for posterity, and then everyone accuses them of being a predator. And so I confined the stories I told to the males who vigorously defended themselves in a public way. Mm-hmm. So you have David Starr, you have Joey Ryan, you have Marty Scurll, and you have Matt Riddle. And those are the folks who, They were very public about their defense of themselves. And, you know, some people say I spend too much time on the defense, but that's what was out there in public. And so I'm not embarrassed. I haven't second thought that. This is the beginning of a dialogue. And so that's in the book. If you don't like the way I handled it, let's continue this dialogue. Sexual abuse has been in society and in professional wrestling for a long time. Let's like racism, let's figure out ways to make this better.
Mm-hmm. And thankfully that dialogue is happening. So, you know, this is very important to have the story told and not shy away from it. So taking, you know, bring it up head on, I think is very important. Lastly, one thing I wanted to get into, as you mentioned, you know, Vince McMahon stepping down, Triple H taking over, and just what an interesting time this is. Are there plans to follow up this? Because there was so much that happened in 2020 and, you know, going into the last year. Are you looking at kind of doing a follow-up book based on this? What are some of the things that fans can look forward to from your next project?
Well, I mean, thanks for asking that. I'm glad fans might even look forward to another project from me. You know, I'm a monthly columnist for Inside the Ropes magazine in the UK. So I get to, you know, I get a lot of satisfaction just, you know, expressing my feelings about the current professional wrestling scene. This is different than after I finished my last book, because I was going to do a book on indie wrestling or the indie wrestling revolution in 2020, and COVID happened. So much is happening right now, and so much will happen. I don't even know where I would begin. So right now, I'm just kind of sitting back. I'm waiting to see what happens in professional wrestling. There will be another book, but I might not start writing it for another 2 years. Like, I'm still waiting to see what the trends are and what the lessons are.
Mm-hmm. So we'll see where the Buzzards fly, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Thank you, Scott.
So, you know, follow the Buzzards, Pro Wrestling in the Age of COVID-19. Make sure to pick up this book along with the other great work Keith does. I'm just happy when you mentioned Inside the Ropes magazine that there's some magazines still out there. I still think,
and I would, let me say this about Inside the Ropes magazine. I mentioned this in the book, but Inside the Ropes magazine, which is based in the UK, you can get it at Barnes and Noble. That is a wrestling magazine where we have conversations just like we're having. And this was started in the midst of COVID-19, because during a time when people weren't even going out and the common knowledge was print is dead, Penny McIntosh and Dante Richardson decided, let's do an old school newsstand wrestling magazine for the analytical wrestling fan. And, you know, and I was honored to be asked to be a columnist for them. And if, like I said, who am I writing for? I'm writing for people like Scott Fishman. So for all of you folks out there, if you're listening to this, you'll enjoy the magazine.
yes. And yes, definitely support this magazine, you know, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I'm still mourning the loss of WWE magazine. I wish AEW would have a magazine. So
Yeah.
hopefully keep it going, everyone.
Yeah, and like the Pro Wrestling Illustrated has their top 500 out. So yeah, definitely read that too. I mean, you know, I mean, there's nothing more exciting, maybe it's my age, than going to a newsstand and grabbing a wrestling magazine.
All right. Thank you so much, Keith. We'll see you at the matches.
Yeah, and I definitely will see you again.
Yep, for sure.